Okay, good evening. It's 8:40. Tonight we're learning Maseches Pesachim Daf Kuf Gimel and Kuf Daled Amud Aleph. We're going to be going about halfway down on Kuf Daled Amud Aleph because if you scan the next couple of Amudim, you'll see that two of them are very short. The Amud Beis of both Kuf Daled and Kuf Hey are on the shorter side, so that will get us to Shabbos itself to get to the bottom of Daf Kuf Hey. We are starting two lines from the bottom on Kuf Beis and Amud Beis, and we're picking up from a comment that was made in yesterday's Gemara. 2 lines from the bottom, Kuf Beis Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Gufa, something we've learned prior. Yom Tov Shechalios Achar Shabbos. What happens when Yom Tov's on a Saturday night? How do we make Kiddush and Havdalah? So we're probably all semi-familiar with the phrase of Yak Nahaz, the acronym of Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman. We're going to learn those Mari Makomos tonight about the order in which we exit out Shabbos and bring in the holiday.
So this year falls.
What?
This year falls that way. Right?
This year, what? That when's the first?
Pesach starts Saturday night.
So this is perfect. You'll see that this is exactly right because the Gemara has a fundamental machlokas amoraim. Rav Amar Yod Kuf Nun Hey Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah. Where's the Zman? So obviously we're not yet talking about the first night of Pesach because there we do say Shechianu. This must be talking about, as we saw the other day, a scenario where it is the last days of Pesach. So the Shita of Rab is that you say Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah, and he's primarily, the fundamental part of his Shita is that Kiddush is before Havdalah. Masha'ein Kain, last few words on Kuf Beis and Amud Beis, Ushmuel Amar Yenahek, Yain Ner Havdalah, and then Kiddush, where the Havdalah is before the Kiddush. Which one do we listen to first? Are we first Milave, the Shabbos Malka, or do we first welcome Yontif? Do we first say the Kiddush, which would sanctify the day of Yontif, and then say goodbye to Shabbos, keeping a few more moments of Shabbos, or no? Do we say goodbye to Shabbos first? So that's a fundamental machlokas between them. And the following shitas on the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph are all in either of those camps. Let's see. The Rabbi Amar Ye Hanek Havdalah before Kiddush, that's going to be in the camp of Shmuel. For Levi Amar Kiniya, he's in the camp of Rab because the Kuf is before the Hey, the Kiddush is before the Havdalah. The Rabbanan Amre Kina, they say Kiddush is before Havdalah like Rab as well. Marbarid Rabna Amar Nikiya, Kiddush before Havdalah as well. Marta Amar Mishmed Rav Yoshua Nihek, and here we have Havdalah before Kiddush. He's in the camp of Shmuel. So there's a lot of shitas. We don't know exactly what the appropriate way to say Havdalah / Kiddush on that seventh night of Pesach. We don't know exactly what to do. So it says the Gemara, Shalach le Avua de Shmuel the Rebbe. Avua de Shmuel, the father of Shmuel, sent a letter to Rebbe. Yelamdenu Rabbeinu Seder Havdalos Heach. How are we supposed to do Havdalah? Please teach us. Yelamdenu Rabbeinu, teach us the appropriate order. Shalach le. What does Rebbe send back? 5 lines down. Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph. Rebbe sends back. He says as follows. Amar, let's read it better. Kach Amar, Shalach le, Kach Amar, thank you. Kach Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Bar Rabbi Yossi, Sha'amar Mishum Aviv, Sha'amar Mishum Rabbi Yoshua, Ben Chananya, Nahik, Ner, first, Borei Morei Ha'esh, then Havdalah, Hamavdil Ben Kodesh L'chol, then Yayin, and then Kiddush. That's the order. And what is between Kiddush and Havdalah? The Hay is first, and that is in the camp of Shmuel. Okay. Amar Reb Chanina, what is the mashal? What is the mashal to say Havdalah before Kiddush? That's what he said, Nahik. He said that you should say Havdalah before Kiddush. Amar Reb Chanina, beautiful mashal. Mashal Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya lemelech sheyotze ve'aparchos nichnas. You have the king that is exiting, and you have the soldier or officer that is entering. So what is the appropriate chivalrous type of behavior? What should we do first? So the halacha is, first, we say goodbye to the king. The king here in the Nimshal is Shabbos. We first do Havdalah, which is the camp of Shmuel. Then we welcome in the soldier. We welcome it. So there's a ranking here. The higher level is going to be Shabbos. The lower level is going to be Yontif. So when the Melech, quote unquote, when Shabbos is leaving, there we have to do Havdalah first. It's not appropriate to start engaging in Yontif practice when we have yet to say goodbye to Shabbos. So therefore, Shmuel's of the opinion that it should be first. So then says the Gemara the following question, My Have Allah. I looked in a Gemara, in the non-Oz V'Hadar Gemaras, there's no note here, but in the Oz V'Hadar Gemaras, there is a little note here because this question, if you look at My Have Allah, the Gemara wants to know what's the din, and then look at what the Gemara answers. Abaye Omar Yak Zina, we added in the Zayin of Zman, but Rava Omar Yak Nehaz, Behilchas Akirava. So the Gemara is bothered. This question can't be, how do we paskin by that later, by the second days of Pesach? It can't be because there's no Zman there. So therefore, the Meforshim here on the side write, and I'll just read it here from the Hakos B'Tzion, V'kisve Yad, Isa, Hecha De'ika Zman, Hechi Avid. What do we do on the first days of Yantif, by Pesach and every other Chag for that matter? What do we do when there is Zman? How does that factor in? That's why the Gemara saying, My Have Allah seems a little, it doesn't continue well from the Gemara before. So that's when we see the Machlokas Abai and Rava, and we paskin like Rava of Yaknahaz, and this is the halacha: Yayin, Borei Priagafen, Kiddush, Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim, Havdalah, Mekadesh Yisrael, we say by Ben Kedushas Shabbos to Kedushas Yom Tov Hivdalta, and then at the end, then we say Zman Shechianu V'Kiyamanu V'Yanu Zman. That's how our siddur is currently structured. That's how we do things. The Hilchas Sakir Rava. Beautiful. We're about a third of the way down on Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph Yaknehaz. That is how we balance out all of the requirements of that Kiddush, Havdalah, and all of the Havdalah components that are added in. It says the Gemara a third of the way down. Rav Huna bar Yehuda ikla lebe Rava. Rav Huna, the son of Yehuda, went to the house of Rava. Aisu lekamaihu. They brought before Rava ma'or uvesamim. They brought before him fire and spices. What did Rava make a bracha on first? It says the Gemara, Baruch Rava abesamim bereisha. First, he made a bracha on the besamim, the hadar ameor, and then only afterwards did he make a bracha on the candle. Amar le, his guest Rav Huna bar Yehuda says to him, Amar le, I don't understand your shita. How can it be that you say first the bracha on the besamim? We have a machlokas in between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, but between the two of them, Bein Beis Shammai and Bein Beis Hillel, Ma'or Bereisha v'Hadar Abesamim. How did you make a bracha on Besamim first? It seems that within the machlokas of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, which we'll see in a moment, that's not correct. It should have been that the Ma'or was first and then the Besamim. Umaihi, what's the Mar Makom where this is discussed? This machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, where we had a specific order between the Ma'or and the Besamim. It's not. The Mishnah writes. This is a Mishnah Maseches Brachos. We've seen this before. It says the Mishnah halfway down. Beis Shammai omrim neru mazon Besamim havdalah. So we have a candle first, and then the Birkas HaMazon, and then we have Besamim, and then we have Havdalah. Good. So we see the Besamim is after the Ner. So the Ner came first. What about Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel Omrim Ner first as well. So under all circumstances, it should not have been that the Besamim were first. So how did Rava say that the bracha is on the Besamim first if both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai don't learn that way? Both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai said the Ner had to be first. So how could Rava make the Ner second? Let's finish off the sheets of Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel Omrim Ner Besamim Umazon Havdalah. The order there is very different, but nevertheless, Ner is before Ma'or in both cases. So Ani Rava answers him, Ani Rava Basrei. Rava responds to Rav Huna bar Yehuda, B'amar Zo Divrei Rab Meir. The version of the machlokas of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai that you just told me, that's through the lens of Rabbi Meir. But Aval Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says no. They are actually not talking about, they don't actually have the Mishnayos the way that you read it. How did Rabbi Yehuda understand them? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo nechleku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel al hamazon shu b'tchila v'al havdalah shi b'sof. What they're not arguing about that at all. What are they arguing about? Al ma nechleku al hameor ve'al b'samim. Beis Shammai omrim meor ve'achar kach b'samim. Beis Shammai says, like the original version of the Mishnah that we saw above, that the meor is first and the b'samim are after. Ubeis Hillel omrim no besamim ve'achar kach meor, that the besamim should be first, and that's how we paskin. V'amar Rav Yochanan nagu am ki Beis Hillel ve'ali b'der Yehuda, and that's why we in halacha. That's why we paskin this way. And in Havdalah we say besamim before we say eish, because of the fact that we look at the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel through the lens of Rabbi Yehuda and not through the lens of Rabbi Meir. Therefore, ladina. That's how we paskin, that we say this. We say besamim first, and then we do ner after, and that brings us about 3/4 of the way down on Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph to the 2 dots, 10, 12 lines out. Rav Yaakov bar Abba ikla lebei Rava. Another person came to visit Rava. This time, Rav Yaakov bar Abba Chazia, and he saw the Baruch Borei Priagafen Akasa Kama. He made the bracha Borei Priagafen on the first cup of wine that was presented to him. The Hadar Baruch Akasa the Birkasa. And then, when they were benching, he also had a cup of wine, and after benching, he made another bracha. So says the Gemara, Amar Le, and Ve'ishte, and then he drank the wine. Amar Le, I don't understand. Says Rav Yaakov bar Abba to Rava, I don't understand. Lama lach kulei hai. Why are you making two different brachos? Habarich lanmar chado zimna. You knew you were going to drink the second cup of wine. You already made a bracha on the first cup of wine. Why are you making two brachos? So Amar Le, what does Rava answer back to Rav Yaakov bar Abba? It's 5-6 lines from the bottom. Amar Le, ki havinan be Reish Galusa hachi avdinan. When I was in the house of the Reish Galusa, this is what they did. This is what everybody did in the home of the Reish Galusa. That's how everyone behaved. They made a bracha on the first cup that was presented, and they made a bracha on the cup that was after benching. So Amar Le, tenach be Reish Galusa da hachi avida. I understand why in the house of the Reish Galusa that people were making multiple brachos, because the suffix maisilan, suffix lo maisilan, we don't know people are going to bring more food. We have no idea in the Reish Galusa how things are going to play out. No clue. But over here, hamanach kasa, come on, v'daitani lave. But the case that you're talking about, Rava, it's all in front of you. You can't argue from the case of the Reish Galusa. There, we have no idea what food is coming. So halacha l'maisa, this plays out in the following way. In your own house, if you tell yourself in your head, I'm going to have a cup of wine, and you make a borei pri hagafen and you drink the wine, and then 5 minutes later you're like, I want another cup of wine, but it really wasn't. You have to make a new bracha. However, if you're a guest in someone's house and you make a borei pri hagafen and they pour you a cup of wine, and then 5 minutes later they pour you another cup of wine, you don't have to make a new bracha. You're not allowed to make a new bracha, because the standing assumption as an oreach when you're in someone's house is that you assume that all the food is coming. In the house of the Reish Galusa, the assumption was the opposite. Things were more tight and stingy. But when you're a guest in someone's house, you only make one bracha rishon. You'll make more brachos in your own house than you will in the house of a guest. So that plays out over here. So that's why the Gemara says to Rava, Rabbi Yaakov bar Abba says to Rava, I don't understand your comparison from the Reish Galusa. In the case of the Reish Galusa, nobody knew what food was coming. So of course, if you had one cup, you drank one cup, your bracha was on one cup. They brought a second cup, you have to make a new bracha. Pasha. But you, Rava, all the wine was in front of you. So now let's get into a core shita that will carry us through the day today. Amar Le, 2-3 lines from the bottom of Kuf Gimel Amid Aleph. Amar Le, what does Rava say back to Rav Yaakov bar Abba? He says, Ana avde kitalmide de Rav. I hold like the students of Rav. What did the students of Rav hold? Says the Gemara, de Rav Barona, Rav Chananel, talmide de Rav. Rav Barona and Rav Chananel were students of Rav. Habu Yasve Besu'udasa. And they were all having a meal together. Turning to the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Kai Alaihu Rav Yeva Sava. The person who was serving them, Rashi, top Rashi, Mishamesh Alaihu, the one who was serving them, his name was Rav Yeva Sava. Amrule, they said to him, Havlan v'nivrich. They said, give us some wine and we shall bench. L'sof Amrule, Havlan v'nishte. And then they said, what we want a little bit of a drink. Amar Lahu, Hachi Amar Rab. Kevan de Amrisu, Havlan v'nivrich, Itzira l'chula mishte. Once you say, I would like a cup of wine in order to bench, you're no longer allowed to eat without a bracha. You have, halachically speaking, ended your meal. Afal pi you didn't bench yet. My taima, what's the reason why? Says the Gemara, de'aschisu da'ataychu, because your da'as has been nullified. Hesach hadas, you've stopped having the appropriate kavanah. It's an interesting idea to say that your meal requires a hesach hadas. Your bracha rishona requires hesach hadas. This halacha is quoted in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Kufay and Tesif Aleph. I'm sorry that I didn't scan it for you, but I'll read it as clearly as I can and translate clearly. So it says the Shulchan Aruch as follows in Siman Kufay. It says Orach Chaim Hilchos Dvarim Ha Nohagin B'Seuda. Siman Kufay and Tesif Aleph. Shulchan Aruch writes, Gamar Seudasov and Natal Yadav Mayim Achronim, for those who are of the custom to wash Mayim Achronim, once a person washes Mayim Achronim, Eino Yachol Lechol Below Lishtos, Ad Shevarach Birkas Hamazon, and you're done. Your meal is completely over. This is its own sugya, which we discussed in Maseches Shabbos, where it says that there was a chova to wash your hands, and then we said, what's the chova? Is the chova similar to the chova of Hadlakas Neros, or we should make a bracha? Why do we make a bracha on Mayim Achronim? So the Gemara says, no, it's because of Melach Sodomis. We wash our hands after a meal because we're concerned about getting this type of salt in our eyes. So let's assume for the moment that someone would wash Mayim Achronim, as some have the custom to do. So then that's the end of their benching. This is now the next line in the Shulchan Aruch is mamish what we just quoted in the Gemara. V'im amar, if a person says havlan unevarich, bring for me, implying a cup of wine, bring for me a cup of wine so we can bench, have a hesach hadas. That's the same thing. Let's say someone just says in English, you guys ready to bench? So it's not so clear that that's this, because you didn't do a maisa yet, you didn't bring a cup of wine, go get the benchers. People still nosh after that. So we need something a little bit more formal, it seems. Otherwise, you have to make a new bracha. There's a whole big deal here in the Gemara. So that's what the Mishnah Brewer here in Sif Katan Gimel writes. Ukshemevarchen below kos. If a person were to bench without a cup, so now you have no mayim achronim and you have no cup, and then you just say im omrim bo nevarech. Everyone sit down. We're benching. Gam kein dina hachid hasachadas. Taka the Mishnah Brewer paskins that it would be that way. That once it's not like, do you think we should bench now? It has to be more clear. We're benching now. Everyone come sit down. So then your meal is halachically over and you cannot eat anymore unless you make another bracha. It's especially problematic for bread at that point, because if your meal's over, then you have to wash again. And you make another bracha of motzi lechem min haaretz al netilas yadayim, you get into a whole nother sugya. But that's this Gemara over here that is the shita of the Talmidim of Rab. Let's continue. The Gemara says 5 lines down on Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Ameimar Umar Zutra v'Ravashi, 3 of the great Amoraim. Havoyasve b'Seuda. The 3 of them were sitting together and having a meal. The Kai Alai, who was their Meshamesh, who was serving them, Ravacha B'rei de Rava, another famed Amora, but just a little bit younger. But they all interacted with the wine a little bit differently. Ameimar Barech al Kol Kasa v'Kasa. When Ameimar was drinking wine, he poured himself a cup, Borei Priagafen. He drank it to the bottom, poured himself another cup, another Borei Priagafen. Every cup of wine that he drank, he made a bracha. Umar Zutra Baruch Akasa Kama ve'Akasa Basra. He only made a bracha on the first cup of wine, and then the last cup of wine, which was the cup for benching. So he didn't follow what Ameimar did. Ameimar was every cup, and he may have had 10 cups that night, but he only made a bracha on the first and on the 10th, and the other 8 in the middle he didn't make a bracha, and that was the sheet of Mar Zutra. Ravashi Baruch Akasa Kama Besu Lo Baruch, and Ravashi was the most lenient. He made 1 bracha on the first cup, and even after benching, he benched. But he didn't make a bracha on the cup that was after benching. That he just drank because it was in front of him and he had it in mind. So because he had it in mind, the benching doesn't ruin, quote unquote, his bracha rishona. We're not used to that. When we say that someone benches, so we typically assume that you can no longer eat. Fascinating halacha. This comes up very commonly in a kiddush environment where you're going to a meal afterwards. So we did this for one of our kids' bar mitzvahs. We had a kiddush for everyone, and then afterwards we had a meal. So the halacha is that if you make you say kiddush, you make an al hamichya, and you eat the pastries, and you eat the cakes, and you eat the chalent, and then you go into a meal and you bench, you still have to make a bracha achrona of al hamichya on the meal, on the snack you had beforehand, because kiddush doesn't go on that. The benching doesn't go on that. The benching goes on the hamotzi and onwards. What about the chalent and the cake and the pastries? So halacha l'maisa, if a person were to be at a kiddush, and they made a mezonos, and they ate a kizayis, and then they go into a meal, you have to say 2 brachos achrona. The benching doesn't pater the al hamichya. So let's continue in the Gemara here. So this is what the 3 Amoraim did. So then Ravacha, who was waiting on them, was just terribly confused. 10 lines down. Amar lehu Ravacha bar Rava anan keman navid. Who of you great people would you like us to be like? Ameimar made a bracha on every cup. Mar Zutra made a bracha on the first and the last cup, and Ravashi only made 1 bracha. You're all great. Tell me what to do. I don't know how to paskin. This is unclear. So Ameimar said, "Don't listen to me." Ameimar Amar Nimlach Ana. I just kept changing my mind. I said, "This is my last cup." Famous last words. This is my last cup. This is my last cup. So because in his mind that was his last cup, then when the next cup was poured, he had to make another Borei Priagafen. Mar Zutra Amar. Mar Zutra was the middle shita who made a bracha on the first cup of wine and on the cup of wine that was by the benching. So what's his svara? Ana de'avde kitalmide derab. That's the shita that we saw on the bottom of Kuv Gimel Amid Aleph, top of Kuv Gimel Amid Beis, which was what was the name? Of Rav Barona and Rav Chananel, the students of Rav, who said that you have to make 2 different brachos, one on the first cup, really, one that applies to all the wine before benching, and one separate one on the cup of wine afterwards. The Ravashi, third of the way down, Ravashi Amar, Ravashi says, I totally disagree with you. The halacha is not like Rav. What did Ravashi say? Ravashi said 1 bracha for all the wine. He says that you don't get to separate the cup of wine that's after benching from the initial bracha rishona. The bracha carries straight through benching. And why does he have a problem with the shita of the halacha of the Talmid de Rab? Because says the Gemara, Yom Tov shechali osachar Shabbos v'amar Rab yakne. There by Yom Tov, that's on a Saturday night Yom Tov. So when you're leaving, this is the Shvi Shel Pesach because there's no Zayin, there's no Zman. That's quoted here as we've discussed a couple of times. Yeah, what did Rav say? Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah, you only make 1 bracha Borei Priagafen for Kiddush, and we don't make another one for the Havdalah. We don't say Borei Priagafen twice. So that shows that this is against Rav, who says that, the Talmidim of Rav at least, who say that you make a bracha in the beginning and a bracha by the cup after benching. Says the Gemara, that's a terrible comparison. Velohi, that Rav Ashi, your argument against the Talmidim of Rav is not correct. Hasam akar daite mi mishtia. In one case that we were dealing with, they stopped thinking about drinking the wine. That has nothing to do with anything. Hacha lo akar daite mi mishtia. And over here, in the case of the Havdalah, no one was akar das. No one was akar das. So therefore, there's only one bracha that's made. So the story here continues with the three Amoraim and with Rav Acha serving them. Kimata le'avdule. By the time they got to Havdalah, Kam Shame, the person who was serving them, he got up, the adli kavuka mishraga, and he lit a torch from a candle. Remember that they didn't have electricity, so they had candles. Once there were 3 medium stars, Shabbos was over, they were going to say Havdalah. What did they get? They didn't have matches necessarily. I don't know what they had to start fires, but whatever they did, they took the single candle and they lit it on avuka. They lit a multi-wicked torch. So says the Gemara, Amarle, lama lach kulei hai. Why? What's with the avuka? What's with the torch? Says the Gemara, Haman shraga. You have a candle, nothing to worry about. Amarle, he says back to him, Rava says back to him, Shamami daite denafshe kavit. He's just doing this on his own. Amarle, ilo shmiale mine demar lo havavi. Had he not seen you do this of actually lighting a torch for Havdalah, where would he have learned it from? He must have learned it from somewhere. So therefore, says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom of the page, Kuf Gimel Amud Beis, Amarle, Lo Savar Lemar Avuka Havdalah Mitzvah Min HaMuvchar. Don't you know? These are ABCs. To do Havdalah on a multi-wicked candle is a mitzvah Min HaMuvchar. That's considered more appropriate than a single candle. Okay, good. So the story of Havdalah continues. These Amoraim are still there. Pasach ve'amar. And then Rava started making Havdalah. And what did he say? Our language, what we're very familiar with. Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael amim yom hashvi l'sheishes me'amaseh. All of these distinctions, what are the distinctions? Ben kodesh lechol, from a holy day to a less holy day, or lechoshech, light and dark. Yisrael la'amim, that's distinction number 4, the Jewish people and the nations of the world, and Shvi l'sheishes me'amaseh, and Shabbos versus the 6 days, 4 distinctions. So Amar Le, they said, what's going on here? Lama lach kulei hai. Why are there so many distinctions? Don't you know that Ladina ve'amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav hamavdil ben kodesh lechol zohi havdalah so Rabbi Yehuda nasi, and we know this halacha l'maisa. Let's say by Ma'ariv on Motzei Shabbos you forget to say Atachon Antanu, and now you want to grab your keys out of the stender and go home. So the halacha is you have to be mavdil. You have to say Baruch HaMavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. That functions as a minimum mechanism to exit you out of Shabbos status once the 3 medium stars have shown in the sky. And this is how Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said it. So why do you have 4 distinctions ben Kodesh L'chol, ben Or L'choshech, ben Yisrael Amam, Yom HaShvil Sheish Me'amaseh? Why? We know that the Havdalah of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was only one nafkamina. It was only one thing, which was Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol. So Amar Le, Ana Keha Svirli, I hold like the following shita. Damar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rav Oshia, Apoches lo yivchos migimel, v'hamosiv lo yosif al zayin. When we talk about Havdalah and the distinctions that are made in Havdalah, you can't do less than 3, and you can't do more than 7. As we'll soon see, the Gemara doesn't say this, but it does seem to imply that it should either be 3 or 7, because 3 differences or 7 differences. And what did we see? We saw a distinction of 4. Right, of the 4 that we normally say, that's quoted in Shulchan Aruch and that's quoted in all of our Sidurim. So Amar Le, last line, and now turning to the top of Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, Amar Mar, Lo Tzlasa Amar V'lo Sheva Amar. You didn't say 3 and you didn't say 7. It seems to be that would have been ideal. You shouldn't say anything less than 3. You should say 3. You shouldn't say anything more than 7. You should say 7. But you said 4, so you're not 3 and you're not 7. So says the Gemara, Amar Le, Ibra. The truth is, Ibra, from the word like the world was created. This is the truth. Ibra. The truth is, says the Gemara, Ben Yom HaShvi l'Sheishes Me'amaseh Me'ein Chasimahu. That is a listed distinction, but the reason it's listed here is because we have a halacha that we're about to learn, that when we close out a bracha with Baruch Atah Hashem, we need a chasima. We need something just before the Baruch Atah Hashem that's reminiscent, that's thematic to the bracha. So, V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. What's the halacha? Hamavdil tzarich sheyomar me'ein chasima samach lechasima. So, when you get to the chasima, so what do we say? Baruch Atah Hashem hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. So we needed to make a distinction. So we said something me'ein lechasima. That was the last one of ben yom hashvi l'sheishes me'amaseh. That wasn't meant to be the 4th one. It's meant to be the summative one that's prior to the Baruch Atah Hashem. So that's what they did in the realms of Shmuel, in the city of Shmuel. Upumpidisai, those who lived in Pumpidisa, Amre, mein psichasan samach lechasimasan. You have to go from the earlier parts of the bracha And that should be your summative line that you put right before Baruch Atah Hashem. My Beinaihu. What's the difference between these two shitas if the summative shita comes from the end of the paragraph or from the beginning of the paragraph of the bracha? So says the Gemara, 5-6 lines down, Kuftal Amalaf, Ika Beinaihu. The difference would be a case of Yom Tov Shechal Yosachar Shabbos, a Saturday night Yontiv, Dechasminan Ben Kodesh LaKodesh. Right, we say Baruch Hamavdil Ben Kodesh LaKodesh. Now, Manda Amar Me'in Psichasan Samach Lechasimasan Lo Bay Lemeimar. According to the one who says that we want to copy the beginning of the bracha as a summative line before the chasim of the bracha, we do not need to say the words Ben Kedushas Shabbos like Kedushas Yom Tov Hivdalta. However, according to the one who says that we need the summative line that's prior to the Baruch Atah Hashem to be from the end of the paragraph and right next to Baruch Atah Hashem, then boy the meimar ben kedushas Shabbos like kedushas Yom Tov Hivdalta, and that's in fact our girsa. So the halacha is, and when you look through Shmona Esrei, it seems that way. Atachonein ladam dasim lamed enosh bina. Chaneinu meitcha de bina baskel Baruch Atah Hashem chonein hadas. The bracha is chonein hadas. The last sentence is chaneinu meitcha. So refainu. Right, you go through the whole bracha; it connects. That's it's the me'ein the chasima. It's right before the bracha. So that's how we pass in halacha l'maisa. That's why the havdalah, the kiddush havdalah, the yaknahaz kiddush that we would make is where we say ben kedushas Shabbos like kedushas Yom Tov Hivdalta, like this shita of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that who says that when you make havdalah, that you have to say me'ein chasima right before the Baruch Atah Hashem. You have to summarize the paragraph, what the paragraph is ending talking about, before you say Baruch Atah Hashem. About a quarter of the way down, Kuf Dalam and Aleph, a little bit more, and then we're going to stop for the night, another third of the page, or half a page. Says the Gemara, Gufa. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rab Oshia. We said at the bottom of Daf Kuf Gimel, Amud Beis, we said, Hapoches lo yivchos mishalosh ve'amosif lo yosif al sheva. That if a person is going to include, not if, when a person includes distinctions of Havdalah, of the difference between Ben Kodesh L'Chol or L'Choshech, if you're going to make that list, we said it really should not be less than 3 and really should not be more than 7 distinctions. So says the Gemara, Meisive, I'm not really sure where you got that from. Omer, we have a Tosefta and Maseches Brachos, and Omer Havdalos b'motzei Shabbosos. When do we say Havdalah? Here's the list. When do we say Havdalah in the Jewish calendar? So we say them, of course, b'motzei Shabbosos. We say them u'b'motzei Yomim Tovim. We say them u'b'motzei Yom HaKippurim. We say them u'b'motzei Shabbos LeYom Tov, when Shabbos bleeds into Yontif, like we've spoken about 4 or 5 times tonight. U'b'motzei Yom Tov l'chulo shal moed, and when you go from Yontif into Chol HaMoed. Aval, lo b'motzei Yom Tov l'Shabbos, but you don't say Havdalah when you go from Yontif into Shabbos, right? We've never done that. That's how we pass in halacha l'mais as well. Tosefta continues just about halfway down, Kuf Dalet Amud Aleph. Haragil Omer Harbe, v'she'enu Ragil Omer Achas. A person who wants to say a lot of havdalahs, a lot of mavdilin, a lot of distinctions, great, have a good time, no problem, no upper limit. But if you're not a Ragil, v'she'enu Ragil Omer Achas, you should only say 1. So that doesn't fit with the shita of the Amora that we saw in the bottom of Kuf Gimel Amud Beis, which is the shita of Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Oshia, who said that it should be between 3 and 7. But this Tosefta doesn't say anything about 3 and 7. If you want to say a lot, say a lot. You want to say less, you should only say 1. That's not what. So how does this shita of Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Oshia fit with this Tosefta? So answers the Gemara, don't worry. This Amora of Rabbi Elazar has a precedent in the Tanaim. Halfway down, just about halfway down, Tanoihi. There really is a machlokes Tanaim. Who is the shita that supports Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rav Oshia? Let's just read the brisa and then we'll see how it works out. Tanoihi, Damar of Yochanan, Binan Shel Kedoshim, the son of the holy ones. Omer Achas. This is supporting the shita of the Tosefta. V'nagu am lomar shalosh, but everybody else would say 3 distinctions. So that's how we see our machlokes. There's 2 different shitas. The Tosefta is the first part that says you only have to say 1. But then the Olam Nagu Shalosh, that's our shita of Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Oshia. So says the Gemara, who is this veiled person of Benon Shel Kedoshim? Man Nihu Benon Shel Kedoshim, answers the Gemara. This person who was the child of holy ones, Rabbi Menachem Bar Simai. What was so unique about Rabbi Menachem Bar Simai? Why did he earn this very lofty title of the son of the holy ones? Answers the Gemara, wow. He was so makbid, he wouldn't even look at the tzura, the shape, the engraved or the raised shape that was on a coin. He was very strict. Halacha l'maisa, that's not the isser. The isser is looking at things that are avodah zarah or making things into those particular shapes. That's a big problem too. Are you allowed to buy? You ever go by people's houses? They have these lion statues in front of their house. That's not, we should be avoiding purchasing those things for sure, for sure. Can you look at them? If they're avodah zarah, you're not even allowed to look at them. But he was so makbid on the isser of avodah zarah, he wouldn't even look at a coin that had an image that was shaped into the metal. So that's why he earned this name. Last line for the day, Shalach le Rav Shmuel Bar Idi. Shmuel Bar Idi said, Chananya achi omer achas v'leis hilchas kavase. My brother Chananya, he would only say one distinction in Havdalah. He would say like Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Baruch HaMavdil ben Kodesh L'chol, but leis hilchas kavase, we don't paskin like him. What do we paskin like? We paskin like the sheet of Rabbi Lazar in the name of Rav Oshia, that you make 3-4 distinctions. Yeah, what we have in our text, right? However it begins, I already forgot. Where are we here? Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol ben or L'choshech ben Yisrael La'amim. And the fourth one is really not one of the distinctions. It's just me'ein nechasima per the halacha that we saw on the top of Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, to make sure in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Mar Shmuel that when we make a bracha that there's a summaritive line right beforehand. On Shabbos, Mir Hashem will pick up right here in the middle of the page with Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and it will take us to the bottom of Daf Kuf Hey Amud Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
We can't